And good morning. Lovely to see you all. And I just want to thank you for turning up this morning for this talk. I was here part of yesterday's day one, taking a look at how many colleagues will come online and join this different form of a festival compared to before. So before we get started, I just want to invite you to orient yourself by maybe closing your eyes for a moment and just tuning into yourself and really settling in or noticing what is most alive in you at the moment as you turned in for this. And what it is that that you turned up for, what it is that you as a person need the most. So I am not doing the poll because I'm really interested in the human voice, the individual voice, the person with all the hats that we wear. And so just slowly as you sort of come back into this experience, if we can use the chat feature, just so you can maybe share your own needs for this morning. Now, I clearly had to prepare a little bit, but just so we can see what are the sort of needs that you have that you're bringing into this morning's keynote. I imagine they will all just appear very quickly, one after the other. And just take a notice of your own willingness to speak to the group as well, in terms of putting your voice into this circle, this community. I'll give that another 20 seconds. Lovely. Wow. So many different needs. And then before I get started, so I do have a few slides, just because I find that having some slides does orient us quite well and helps people follow the flight plan of things a little bit easier than me just speaking. And I don't plan to speak for 45 minutes either. I will invite you to do a few things as well. But before we do that, if I can also invite you to just take a look at the screens, and I've noticed quite a few people have their video off. So if I can ask you to turn your video on if you can, just for the next 1 minute or so. So that, and I'm going to invite you all just to start looking at the people that are here. To just take a moment to really register the different faces of your colleagues. So it's a real pleasure for me because I recognize quite a few faces. I'm not going to get a shout out, but it's really lovely to see some familiar faces. So Thank you very much for being here. And just take a moment to sort of go through the different screens of people and just connect to all the different individuals that are here with us. Those who have their screens on. Yeah, quite a few people have their screens off. If you joined us late, I'm asking people to turn on their video just for a moment so we can all see you. And this is incredibly important because actually one of the things that I remember as a co-chair of the London Staff Developers Group was the importance of people really participating and taking an active role. And that means really being seen and also seeing other colleagues. And so today I'm inviting you to take a moment to really see one another, because we're not just our professional hat, we're also have our own personal lives and different hats that we wear. And this becomes really important when it comes to our resilience, as I will talk to you about. So look, it's 10, which means that I now have a really good timing cue to take you into this keynote. And so the warmest of welcome this morning from me. And I feel incredibly touched by Rosanna encouraging me to come and share my learning. And it's been quite intense learning, but then again, I do like learning and I'm driven by curiosity. So today I want to talk to you about resilience and how resilience really affects our leadership, our stance, and our ability to respond. And I'm going to invite you to look at that in an extremely practical way, because most of my work is really very pragmatic, even if it is informed by theory and research from incredible number of different disciplines. It's sort of where I have fun. So I want to invite you to have some pen and paper to take some notes, because I believe that this talk is directed at two parts of you. So the professional, and I'm hoping there might be some insights there for you in terms of inspiration and ideas for things you can do as a change agent, but also the personal. So I will be speaking about things that I believe can really impact you as a boyfriend or girlfriend or partner or parent, or a child that's taking care of your parents, etc., or a sibling. So this is really very human-centric. And I want to start with this group exercise to really ask the question, as you look at this picture, and I look at things in terms of systems, I want to invite you to consider for a moment, where do you get your power from? And what nurtures you? What actually resources you in order to be able to deal with adversity, to deal with change, and to deal with everything that we're dealing with at the moment? So yesterday, listening to Chris's talk, I was really struck by two things. One was us needing to face what is, which is, of course, the cornerstone of all therapeutic work. And all of leadership work, all of personal work, is not denying the truth of our reality. But the other one, which from an engineering perspective was so interesting, was adjusting the power of the boat and the way the boat actually manages things. And it's this adjustment of our resources to be able to face into the reality, the challenges of reality, that I'm really concerned with. And so in this picture, I really want you to, for a moment, with your pen and paper to one side, maybe draw this picture if you wish, although I'll share the slide, but really start looking at what resources you. So is it your personal history? So to do with your ancestries or your country of origin or your cultural history or where you come from? Is it the sector as employer, the sector as, a group of people you work with and, and people you serve? Is it that maybe you've come in from outside the sector? So there are other resources. So you might be drawing on things that are totally from elsewhere. Is it your colleagues and your collective history? So yesterday in one of the workshops I got to go to with my time, there were 3 ladies presenting, and one said, I've been at this institution for 17 years. And I said, wow, she has a lot of collective history with others. So, and is it your family, your biological family, or the family that you've created for yourself, including your friends? And is it the people you serve? I think when I run leadership programs, I often ask leaders, who are you here for? Because it becomes incredibly important to ask yourself that question, is who do you serve? And of course, we can't serve any of this, and we can't even, let's say, accept the gift of resources from anywhere else if we don't connect within and actually find our own resources. So I will take a minute or so to just tell you, for those of you, some of you know me a little bit, some of you probably don't know me absolutely. So my personal history is of a person who was born in Poland. I was taken to the US as a child and left behind probably one of the most important people in my life, my grandfather, whom I loved and with whom I felt incredibly safe, into a incredible storm where people were not particularly nice to Poles and where kids weren't particularly nice either. But I have benefited from that tremendously, and especially from American education, which at that time was, for me, an incredible, absolute gift. So I have entered the HE sector very early on and stayed in it as a student, as a researcher, as an academic, as a practitioner, and now as an advisor and a change maker. But I've also, having been, a child of immigrants with 2 suitcases, I come from a working class family. So I have had to work, and I've worked in jobs early on, and they were all outside the higher education sector initially. So I draw on experience and inspiration of what it means to earn a dollar, what it means to really show up and to help people and to earn your living. And of course, along the way, I've met friends, and I've also met people who may not have been friends, but Mother Teresa has a really good phrase for this. She says that, even if people are not so nice, you should be nice to them anyway. So that's a good attitude to keep. And I've made a lot of great friends along the way, and I became clearer and clearer in my own personal journey about where it is that I can serve and how. So I'm going to invite you to sort of generate, maybe as a little activity after this keynote, your own narrative as a leader in terms of the way that you stand and what you stand for. Because I would say I stand for the underdog. I stand for the person who is often excluded, the person who is snubbed out, and the person who is the foreigner, who is not the in crowd. And that I draw on that from my personal history so that I can bring about more inclusion. And so today's flight plan, because I think that often helps people a little bit, is that I'm going to present you a working model of a human-centered approach that I believe boosts and restores resilience, because my one-to-one work is very much around healing and recovery. And I'm going to say that I'm going to draw together three things. The research literature around self-efficacy, burnout, and trauma, and how they interlink. And I'm going to show you that the current context that we're in strengthens and potentiates the link between them. And it is really helpful if we're going to take a human-centered approach to start to look at those three things and how they really inform us about the way we are dealing with our own resourcefulness and also how we support other people, and particularly in jobs of staff development, OD, coaching, etc. If you're not looking after yourself, you're going to have very little to give to others. I'm going to invite you into a practical experiment and breakout discussions to get you thinking about how you can apply this simple model into your work. And I'm going to leave with three practical tools that will hopefully help you feel more calmer, collected, and empowered. So I have began my whole journey oriented towards individual empowerment, simply because I had to survive. So, that's where it began. But my experience has taken me into recognizing, and that's experience both good and bad, because I've made quite a few mistakes as a leader. And I keep on learning. And I think mistakes are very powerful because they give you the biggest learning. Into the sort of need for and benefit of the larger collective. So if we get the collective, it's really good. And I've become known, I think, in the sector now for what I call the triple benefit, where I believe that the right intervention, whether I'm working one-to-one, coaching someone or advising, or whether I'm running a program, is a triple win. It's a win that benefits the individual. It's a win that benefits the collective. And ideally, it raises up, let's say, the institution, its recognition, its brand. But if we think of the SDF, we can say, like this keynote, it hopefully connects you to others and lifts you as a collective. It lifts our sector, and it gives you some individual empowerment. So the lesson that I would say is the lesson of my last 15 years of studying conflict resolution and systemic work and coaching and trauma-informed therapy and leadership is that there is certainly no we without a me. The individual becomes incredibly important. And our whole way of coming to be as babies, as young adults, is that we have to be seen and heard. So we must find our place within the larger collective. And a lot of problems begin when we're excluded and we don't find it. And of course, there is no I without a we, because we are in relationship with other things, but also we are an incredible system unto ourselves. So some of my key contribution, if you allow me just to brag for a moment, are probably around tools and frameworks for personal productivity, well-being, and expression of potential. So one of the first tools is the Get Productive Wheel, which I think some people in the sector know, but perhaps not as many as should. Whereas I think people in the coaching community know very well, because I've trained about 2,600 of them. This is a tool that's allowed me to help people begin to see how we make habitual thinking omissions that allow us not to be as resourceful thinkers as we could be. I then moved on purely through phenomenological analysis of people on my long-term programs by noticing that people who became incredibly productive also, through this lovely neurological feature called addiction to success, could begin to burn out. And burnout became something very fascinating for me because, again, drawing on my own experience, I burned out 3 times. So I'm an expert in this one. I own a PhD from the Institute of Burnout. And so I designed a system and a framework to help us avoid burnout, but also to help us recover from burnout. And the large lesson in that is of balance. And all along the way, for probably the last 15, 20 years, I've been really coming into grips with integrating not just the cognitive and the emotional into the somatic, which is really about our bodies and how our bodies behave and get sick, but also the spiritual. And so what I'm after now in leadership and personal empowerment is really being able to connect how who we are and the spirit of our true potential gets to either flow through us or gets to choke us to bits and not work. So resourcefulness at a glance is, of course, our ability to respond to things incredibly well. And as I said to you, I'm going to build you this little model that I'm finding to be true in practice. And my practice is divided between advising and analyzing research institutes and higher education places, and also places that are outside higher education in terms of culture. But I also run programs, and I hold a 2-day a week, now more 2.5 day a week, one-to-one clinic of people. So I really am able to triangulate across different contexts and systems. And I also work with people at different levels, as you will see in a moment. So this model, I want to really kind of quickly talk through and really help you embed. And that's the following. Imagine 3 sorts of inputs on the left. So we have our resourcefulness level. So how resourceful am I? And I'm going to draw here on a particular model of that, or particular piece of work from Albert Bandura, one of my heroes. And that's self-efficacy, purely because self-efficacy is the closest I can think of towards task, goal, and action. And when we want to respond in terms of resourcefulness, that's where we should look, okay? The second one is burnout levels. I put in italics tiredness, because many people who will say to you repeatedly, oh, I'm so tired. Oh, I feel so tired. I feel so tired. I often wonder if their tiredness is not the sort of Heinz beans for a very complex phenomena of burnout. And particular traumatic history. I think you cannot be an adult without some adverse experiences. I don't think we get through life that easy, okay? So if you imagine those 3 sources and their particular levels coming along to face environmental stressors, and I've listed just a few. So pandemic, but it could be your personal illness. For example, I have a chronic condition, and it's really been taking my head for a spin, not to mention my body and my emotions. But pandemic is, is around us now, and it's really changing our lives. But we can't get away from huge inequalities. I think if you look at the sort of socioeconomic spread across all countries, and the inequalities in access to resources, it is staggering, and it will hurt everyone. So it is a stressor. The Black Lives Matter movement, Brexit in the UK, all sorts of other polarizations between haves and have-nots, people with education, people without, people with degrees, people without, people with enough access to food, and people who have to go to a food bank. Climate crisis. The last years of artificial intelligence impact and what this means for us in terms of work, in terms of futures, in terms of the way we want to live and personal freedom. Water scarcity is a very big one that many of us still don't appreciate, particularly in, let's say, Europe, but it's a huge global issue. And of course, burnout levels. So if you look at World Health Organization, you'll see that burnout is like a silent, nasty pandemic because it's getting bigger and bigger. So the way we're going to react to these, as well as any other stressors, and you'll see there will be other ones, because our daily lives are tons of stressors, micro stressors on a daily basis. Our level of resourcefulness, our level of burnout, our history of past trauma are all going to give us a certain backpack of available resources that we will then have in order to face these different challenges, plus our job, and we'll create a response. And this response will either be of someone who can address them and respond effectively and move through them, or a less resourceful response if that's not the case. But what's also really interesting, which somehow got missed out on my slides, is that, of course, because of our collective, when we have people around us, people we work with, people we care about, who are not responding resourcefully, we cannot help but notice. Whether we admit it or not, we are also always fed back by people who are, in a way, being left behind, whether we like it or not. And this generates all sorts of reactions. But one of the key ones that will drain us as well is guilt and a bit of shame. Because we are really here pretty much hardwired to care for one another. So if we don't do it, it does have a consequence. So if we look a little bit deeper at this model, as I said to you, for resourcefulness, I look at self-efficacy, Albert Bandura's work, because we look at direct experience or history of attainment. So have I got a history of past successes to give me the confidence that I can be resourceful? Can I see other people who are incredibly like me that are succeeding? This is incredibly important, this idea that you need to map on to someone who is like you. Because, we see this, for example, in education, where you go to an opera as a Black young student, and you don't see anyone in the audience who's like you. So even though you might be watching people be in a certain context and think this is accessible to you, or let's say science, you might actually really draw the conclusion that it actually is not accessible to you. So this idea of mapping onto and giving the right role models becomes incredibly important in terms of self-efficacy. Encouragement through persuasion from people we believe in. So, we don't just take anyone's word when it comes to our resourcefulness. It has to be a person that we trust and that we hold in high esteem. So this is where genuineness really, really pays off. And of course, our physiological state. So the state of our, physical resourcefulness and our emotional resourcefulness and so on. So notice how, drawing on this storm metaphor, resourcefulness could be above the water. It could be the sort of living from a place where we can enter into our full potential. But notice that at the edge, any level of stress and tension in the body, so neuromuscular tension, continuous stresses, emotional, cognitive, things to do, begin to signal to the nervous system a sign of vulnerability. So they start to say, oh, my boat isn't so safe. And that's where, over time, if this is the case, we can go into various burnout levels. And so I would point you to the work of Herbert Freudenberger, from the 1960s, 70s, but effectively three key qualities of burnout will be exhaustion, so loss of energy and will, a degree of cynicism, which is effectively a disconnect and loss of meaning, and a decrease in performance, because ultimately we're just got less to give. And on top of this, of course, comes our history through the back door. So whether it's any sort of past difficult situations, and by trauma, I mean pretty much any event that was too much, too fast, too little, too soon. So basically any event that might have overwhelmed our ability to cope with the resources we had at hand at that time. And, I can point you and invite you to have a look at the ACE research and work from Wales around adverse childhood experiences, because I think it's really hard to find an adult who has not had at least 3 or 4 of adverse childhood experiences. So that sets our neurological baseline for how we can actually respond, as well as, for example, previous events that have been incredibly painful and stressful might have created depression or previous burnouts, because all of those things create what I put on the right, adaptive mechanisms. So we create adaptive mechanisms, or our nervous system does, in order to help us cope, but it puts us on the back foot in times of crises. And burnout in general tends to isolate us. So our ability, as you can see, to respond will differ. And so I wanted to add the grid to this a little bit, because what I found in the grid framework is that where people have talked a lot about work-life balance, I think they forgot 2 other variables that are incredibly important to all of us if we want to be resilient. And they are self-care and career management. You can be resilient at work and be very engaged if you're worried about your own career, or if you begin to be dissatisfied with the progress and future prospects of your career. And you cannot be the most loving, caring, and giving person in your personal life if you neglect yourself. And so these might be more hidden aspects of life, but if you think about it from this perspective, a healthy agency of a human being is to start to balance these 4 components into something that resembles what you inside your nervous system probably know you need. So the relative importance of these will differ by different people, but they are all nonetheless incredibly important. And what I have been able to show over time is that people who do not get this balance right will end up in isolation. So they'll end up in career derailment, they'll end up in isolation at work, being excluded, they'll end up in burnout and nervous breakdown if they do not self-care enough, and they'll end up really unhappy in their personal life. So just to kind of show you that this really matters. So before I send you to groups to have a think about how all of this might work, I want to really draw it into the practicality of every human being. And I've picked 3 meta examples so we can look through it. A scientist, a manager, administrator, and a student, because these do make a lot of sense in our sector. So notice how a scientist who has failed a previous promotion, that's a traumatic event. If you go for something and you get a rejection, it's incredibly painful. Some people take 2 years to recover from it. It's a real knockdown. Their level of burnout might be that they're working close to exhaustion on a daily basis because that's what's required. And we wear a badge for hard work. And their current resourcefulness might be, I'm up for, my department's up for review and I don't feel I contribute enough, I make too few papers. So can this person enter and respond well in COVID times and be incredibly resourceful? Imagine a manager, lovely person whose daughter is bullied at school. And I don't think there's a mother in the world who's not going to be affected and traumatized by their child being traumatized. And then someone who's also potentially facing lack of sleep for days on days because of menopause or premenopause. And then who's having a resourcefulness state of fighting a huge imposter syndrome as a leader, thinking, you know, I clearly don't deserve being here. I'm nowhere near as smart as the people I manage, etc., etc. And imagine a student. A lot of students that we have in the UK are international students. They're far away from their homes. They are homesick and they're often isolated, and current conditions have made that worse. A student in one of my study groups, I've noticed that students' levels in research of psychosis and mental health are about 4 times worse than of professionals. So these are vulnerable groups in general because they are in the period of their life where they're needing validation from other people, and they will work so hard to get it. They'll try to get it at any cost. What is that for? A recipe about burnout. And then the current lockdown and career fears of employment are shattering their dreams. So I'm going to invite you to look at this model I've presented. And the question I want to ask you as I send you into breakout rooms for 6 minutes, 6 or 7 minutes in trios will be, how would you support the resilience of these individuals? And I want you to really consider the human side of this in terms of, what do you think that doctor, scientist, that leader, manager, could be one of your colleagues, could be you, and a student might actually really need in order to feel good and be able to respond to the current context. So I suggest you that you agree on one of those actors, one of those personalities in your trios. And I'm gonna wave goodbye and send you into the Zoom God of breakout rooms. And I'll see you back here in 6 minutes.
I think you're on mute.
Unmute. Thank you. My helper is helping me out. I was on mute, so I know it probably was too short a time, but I hope it got you started thinking and possibly sharing. And we'd just love to have you be fired up to share your thoughts and learnings and insights via the chat feature that maybe Rosanna can read out to us just quickly, but also we will continue that conversation afterwards, I believe.
Hi there. Hi, Madalena. Good to see you, and good to see everybody else. It was too short, but it was lovely. It was so good just to say hello to people, and I wasn't familiar with any of the people in my little group, and to quickly give an example of something that was happening with our work with either external clients or staff within the university or researchers or, you know, academics. And it was interesting how everybody was, if I'm correct in saying this, the thing that unified us was that irrespective of whether you were a scientist, a student, or a manager, it was about the individual attention giving that we were all in agreement that that was our approach, which mirrors very much a lot of what you've been saying this morning. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mariel. That's really lovely. Yes, yes. So that's really wonderful. I want to invite everybody to speak because I'm keen to share my 3 tips and resources before we finish. But so lovely of what you said, and I think keep on writing the insights because they're there for everyone to share later and digest, and I will digest them with you. But one of the things that in our group, little trio, which I got to join, was also incredibly true, is just how heart opening it is to have some people relate to your experience and say, I see this in myself. And it immediately makes us feel less alone. And the way we become unresourced is that the situation overwhelms us and we feel, oh, that's it, I'm not up against this, and I collapse. So I really was hoping that even though we didn't get as much time as I wish we did, you did get into that, or I would invite you to build a workshop around it and run it in your own institutions. So before I conclude, I want to share with you 3 practices for resilience. I will go through them very quickly. The first one is really around creating creative cognitive flexibility. So one of the things that we know is correlated with resilience is our ability to take a different perspective on something and not be sort of drowned by looking at things the wrong way. So, you know, it's like, I love this picture because I think you can take a wounded old dog and teach it new tricks through love and care and compassion and kindness. And so I just want to inspire you to really think and never give up on any of your maladaptive patterns or adaptive behaviors or things like that, and see that you can always start anew and find a new way. And so sort of keep on trying. The second one is that designing for resilience with my grid tool is, I'd say I'm biased clearly, but I think is one of the best neurological resourcing tools, simply because it addresses balance, unity, and flow across the piece. So I won't go through these tips in a lot of details, but you are going to have the slides, and I think they are self-explanatory. But I would say aim to tick all of them. So if you were to give yourself an action list, this might be an incredibly good action. I'm going to actually ask my team to create a PDF around it because I've lectured on it long enough that it would be useful to just make that into a tool. But it really, just to really underline the point of how much we need to balance all of them together. And so if you're excelling in one area, imagine the grid almost being overtaken by one of the domains, and that squeezes out life and support from somewhere else. And finally, cultivating spirituality and finding personal meaning. So I took this picture literally yesterday on a walk. It's a large tree, it's a rose tree. If anyone can tell me what sort of tree it is, I'd hugely appreciate it, and you'll get a copy of all my books if you can tell me what tree that is. Because, you know, the tree was more or less dead for winter in preparation, apart from this one bud. And I thought, wow, isn't that absolutely special? And I think in times of difficulty, we have to dig deep in our internal resources. And there are a number of different things I've been playing around with students that I think are incredibly powerful or proving to be very powerful. And the first of them is a personally meaningful motto. If you can find a motto that you can live with and say, you know, I will get through this, Every day you wake up, that's your motto. So you have to act in accordance with your motto. If you're gonna wake up and say, "Oh, I'm gonna, capsize today," bad motto. So you have to think in this way, but it has to be one you can connect to, and you have to find the meaning of that. I think there's a whole lecture on the neurological impact of nature. So anything you do to allow your space around you to help you feel calm will be an asset to you. And it actually is proven to grow the brain. So it actually helps our brain stop shrinking as we age. And to nurture an artistic practice. I just completed a program for a DTC for PhD students around the grid, and they were amazed by this concept. But I think everyone is an artist in their life, not just people who paint and make sculptures. You're an artist in every job. And so if you can approach the way you parent, the way you love, the way you manage, the way you lead as your artistry, you stay a master, and you come to things with a playfulness, without that attachment to an outcome. And you say, today was not so good, but tomorrow will be better. I'll take my lessons and I'll keep on learning and evolving my practice. And surrendering, most of spirituality is about surrendering to forces larger than you. So it's a way of humbling the ego and the mind, and allowing things to really be co-created with something larger, including asking for help and getting help from colleagues. So, I think these words are attributed to John Lennon, but I think there's a huge debate who said them. But I think they really do chime with my experience. Everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it ain't the end. And that's really probably, if you don't have a motto, I will give to you this one. I don't want to spend too much time about Make Time Count, but we are a small team. We're dedicated to helping things be better. I want to point out only two things here, really. If you would like to collaborate in any way, we'd love that. Please reach out. We can offer a number of different things. And we're training people in tools and techniques so they can be in-house people who do that. But I do want to point out the personal development retreats. So I run international one-day retreats around the two methodologies for integration, and that is a really lovely invitation for colleagues in the sector to come and do some of your own personal work. And I have somehow began an independent book publishing company. So we finished sort of publishing our little trilogy, and we're going to be inviting writers to come, and we're going to want to publish other people, particularly in the area of helping equip people to do well and be well. So that's all I really wanted to say. Happy to take some questions from you, and delighted to be with you this morning.
Thank you very much, Magdalena. That was really something else. And from the comments I've been reading here, everybody engaged with the activities on a personal level and also on a group level. And I offer that if you have questions, please post them. We have a couple of minutes. If we don't manage to answer them today, right now, Magdalena is happy to answer them either by blog or by recording a short clip. So please don't be shy. Your questions are welcome. Just in the meantime, a little summary, so many points that people have highlighted on the chat. So first we have the do well, be well, surrender to something greater than you. And something that you mentioned earlier about there is no we without a me, as much as there is no I without a we. So I strongly feel that people are taking a lot from today, and a lot of more messages of gratitude. People now looking at resilience. There are people are taking a lot also to reflect on further.
Thank you very much for your kindness and for all the lovely comments. I have been away from connection with many of you because I've been working hard and needing to actually service the work. And for me, the work is something that's really important, and it is my calling. But it's been an absolute pleasure to be with you. I do plan to take part in some of the other workshops, so you might well see me. Again, if you're not connected with me, then please do reach out. I always answer to everyone, and the messages come to me and not my personal assistant. And yeah, I feel really in good company here. And it was Rosanna's heartfelt approach that convinced me to to say yes to come and share some things with you. So it's been an absolute pleasure. And I do come back as I think our whole panelist does for a discussion as well on Friday.
Right.
But I will be floating in and out of the next days as well.
That's fantastic.
And yes, please do leave